Now I'm very kind and I say it's the unwitting over control and the unwitting, and look, it is unwitting, but it's very harmful. And until you see something that removes that, you're just trapped.
We're in search of new rules for work, evidence-based practices fit for a hybrid world. This year, we're hosting a multi-month interdisciplinary research project looking for the best ways of unleashing team creativity. Join me, David Mastronardi, and my New Rules for Work co-producer, Elise Keith, as we explore the minds and the work of the people shaping not just our project, but the new rules for work. This project is made possible through the generous contributions of many people who are volunteering their time and through the support of our partners. To learn more about the project, buy tickets for January Symposium, register your team for the experiment, or partner with us, check out newrulesforwork.com. If you want to get in touch directly, email info@newrulesforwork.com.
Today, we are talking with Keith McCandless. He's one of the advisors for our New Rules for Work project. Now, Keith is the co-developer of Liberating Structures and the co-author of the book, The Surprising Power of Liberating Structures. He operates a global consulting practice focused on strategy development, creative adaptability, and including all voices in shaping the next steps. He calls himself a structured improvisationalist. And I invited Keith to join this program because I had encountered his work through the amazing, open, collaborative, global community of liberating structures practitioners, where they're constantly pushing what's possible in terms of online workshops, in-person workshops that unleash the power and the voice of everyone towards building a better future. So Keith, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for agreeing to be on our advisor board for this project and participating in this experiment.
My pleasure. I want to hire you as my chief marketing officer. That sounded really good. Sounded really good.
Hi, Keith. Where in the world are you right now?
I'm up in Seattle, Washington.
And what do you do there? What is a structured improvisationalist?
Well, my day job is a consultant. So this morning I got up at 5 a.m. and talked to people in Europe and India. And they're trying to figure out the future of work. So how could you both have structure and give people lots of flexibility at work, but get great business results? How do you do that? So that's a pretty typical complex challenge that I work on as a consultant. And there's lots of different ones, but that's the day job, is help organizations or professors or universities or scientific organizations. I like variety, so I seek out, and the work attracts people from lots of different domains. So yeah, that's what I do up here. In the last few years, it's all been virtual. I think it's going to change, but most of it's been virtual. So yeah.
And you said that's your day job. Is that implying that there are things that happening around the day job?
Well, there's a movement, what Elise mentioned. There's a community that we hold together or communicate with or support. So because I wrote this book with a colleague, for better or worse, people who are learning the set of really practical liberating structures in some ways are just methods. You can view them just as methods. And so they're learning, they're applying it in a classroom, in a boardroom, in a church, in a big important scientific organization. And I support that informally, not as a consultant, but just in a learning community. And the way we're inspired by distributed or natural systems. And so we don't have a commercial, we don't have a organization at the center. It's just a group of people who care about the work. And so our organization is a very broad, informal, delightful set of relationships.
So I imagine that has also changed, or through that lens, you've viewed this change that's happened in the past 2.5 years. You just mentioned that a lot of it's gone virtual, but In what you have observed, what has happened and what's happened to work as you observe it, but maybe also in the way that you now work? What's gone on in the last 2.5 years?
Yeah. Well, we inherited a bunch of typical ways of working. And in researching the book and the work I'm doing, we found the big 5 ways that people work all the time and kind of universal. And they maintain themselves through the pandemic the last few years. And so those 5, these are real small we call them microstructures. And we don't even know they exist most of the time. They're unwitting, both in using them and what they do and don't do. So a presentation, a status report, brainstorming, and then open discussion. So that's a range from, or facilitated discussion is there too. And that's a range from very controlled to open discussion, and brainstorming are kind of more open. And we found that all of those have unwitting elements in which, and they've carried on right through the pandemic, Dave. It's just, oh my God, I wish it wasn't true, but it's true. These are patterns of how we do work. They came from medieval times almost, except brainstorming, maybe that's new. And they unwittingly exclude all kinds of people, all kinds of different voices. They unwittingly over control most of them. And also they stifle creativity. So, and they don't completely do any of those things, but they do those things to a degree that's not acceptable. So the work I've been doing is like, okay, let's not do those. Let's replace or create an alternative where you never have to have a presentation. You don't have to have brainstorming. You don't have to have an open discussion. There's no report outs and no facilitators almost. And so that just sounds like craziness, doesn't it? A little bit like, can you just not do any of those things and be more productive? You can include all the voices. You can generate creativity beyond your wildest imagination. And you're not over controlling anybody, which is really, when you're controlling somebody, you usually don't know it. So all of those things, that's what the work is. And the big shift was, of course, all to virtual. So we had a repertoire that was developed face-to-face over the last 20 years, a book written 10 years ago, but a repertoire that was face-to-face. And we converted, I'd say 99% of it to platforms, Zoom and the big whiteboards. And I'm not going to name all the names, but we found ways to either hybridize or go completely online, which is one of the big reasons I'm interested in the work we're doing for New Rules.
So I have a question about that, if I can. So,
please.
Keith, you talked about the unwitting exclusion, which I love that phrasing, right? The unwitting exclusion of traditional brainstorming and status reporting and whatnot. And then as the community went online, one thing I saw was a dramatic increase in cross-cultural collaboration, right? So not that wasn't there before, but when we practiced in person, we practiced with people we could get to in a reasonable proximity. Whereas when I jump onto a community event and they're doing not working or whatnot, and I'm listening to people who've got a beehive on a roof in Amsterdam and, other kinds of things from all over the world, it's becoming more inclusive in new ways. Is there anything that you've learned in that process that is taking you beyond where the structures were, 10 years ago, because they've been mashed with so many more new people?
Yeah. I think some of the fundamental things, Elise, that we started with is until you give each person a minute to think for themselves and have a conversation with just one other person, you haven't given really anybody much opportunity to develop their voice in a way that it would be heard. And so our voice is shaped immediately and simultaneously in each moment with others, just as we're doing right now. There's no script for this. It's completely unscripted. So until you And it's still relatively novel to start addressing any challenge with, well, give a person a minute to think for themselves. And then their first thing is just a short amount of time talking with one other, not trying to convince anybody, but until you do that, and that's pretty unique across all cultures. It just doesn't happen. And so until that happens as a habit, we're still excluding voices. Now, the voices were there, but all they can do is try to throw their thing in at some point that's past the moment in which it's being shaped together with others. I could say generatively or, all that, but we skip over that. And that's the unwitting part. We still skip over it in every culture. And so, like, I'm not picking on in Asia, but it's a little harder to get people to turn cameras on, but it's not hard to get them to give a second to think and then talk to one other person, and they may or may not, slowly but surely there's a little shift around. Oh no, I've been invited to shape what's happening because I'm thinking for myself, I'm part of this mix. So that momentum, I think of that momentum, it cuts across all the cultures. And if you start with that, and then all the richness of people in each of those cultures working in different domains, depending on where it is, people will bring more of themselves. Like, you have many dimensions to yourself. Well, how many do you bring to work? It's just, there's that. And then there's all the dimensions of each person has a different functional role and training and capabilities that they bring. And so that's what's interesting to me, that all that richness is available if you get out of the habits of conventional structure. Yeah. Sorry for the long answer, but that's what's changed for me. Yeah. That's the interesting part.
As we've gone through this universal, almost universal change, have you seen either those unwitting ways? Has the mode highlighted or diminished maybe some of those? And what are the ranges of response? Have you seen good responses to this, and people or organizations using it as a chance to maybe change, and maybe some blindly went into it and maybe there are some bad responses?
Yeah, there's everything.
Yeah.
There's everything. I want to tell you some stories, but I'm not sure that's going to fit in here. I think that it's really easy to snap back to what we know best, which are all the unwitting. So that, I don't care how much progress, my version of progress is, you've changed some of your habits, at least some of the time. And usually there's a big event, as a consultant, I get hired for a big event or a series of events in which we don't do any of those conventional structures. We use the other ones, and they make a lot of progress. And then I'll pop back into the thing that I didn't organize with them, and I see all the things I don't like. And I'll call it out because I've got nothing. I'm not in the organization usually, so I'll call it out and say, hey, and you can do it in way, did you have a chance to say what you thought, or did the series of presentations get in the way? There's polite ways or impolite ways to point it out. So I think the snapback is something that happens. And I try to prepare clients for the progress you've made is something you need to sustain. And it takes some amount of discipline, and maybe even a little bit more online, because it's pretty easy just to say, well, we've got the presentations lined up. And you don't have to do, like when I'm working with a group, we specify what kind of interaction will be present, like at the smallest little scale. And once you get used to it, it's not a lot of work, and people know what it is. But we still find it easy, and we snap back to, well, one example would be, let's just do a brainstorming or an open discussion. And let's take open discussion. Well, we're not getting anywhere with the presentations. We're not getting the result we want. So let's just be free. Well, at the end of that, the leader usually says, that was great. We just went everywhere. And And a couple of people got into a scuffle and others, agreed or disagreed. And it really was not productive. And the leader is left with the feeling, or the manager, or whoever convened the meeting is left with the feeling that we didn't get anywhere, but I have to pretend like we did. And so all of those experiences to make the shift to a different takes a little more discipline. And, people just aren't, well, I know when you first put out, like, we're going to work on the new rules and, we're going to have a conference, and we're going to test the different methods. I was so excited because there is cynicism about online. There's equal and more well-established cynicism about meetings generally. People will immediately end them and complain to high hell about them, but they still repeat those patterns. So for me, because we inherited these things and the pandemic and everything that's happened over the last few years, kind of opened a door. And not everybody has walked through, but those who have had the opportunity to sustain or start some different patterns and then sustain them. Right? Can we do that? So if we could be more rigorous about measuring how well any new rules, let's call liberating structures one of the sets of new rules that you're attracting people to, and evaluating, how do we know they're working and what would it take to sustain them over time? Right? What is that? So that's why I'm that's why I'm here. I want to walk through the door, maybe not look back much, and find some gold. I found it, but it's there. The future is, I love this William Gibson quote, the future is already here. It's just not well distributed. Right? We know how to do these things. We're actually pretty awesome at doing them. Why is it so uneven?
Why do you think? What is, I don't know if it's a tension. You talk about people very easily snap back to what we know because it's hard to do new things. Is it, what in your estimation, through what you've seen and as a consultant who you're working with, what is the tension that's there between going forward and snapping back?
Yeah. Well, I really don't think there's resistance to change. I do think there's attraction to what works. So if you only know that thing that worked for you back then, you're going to keep doing it. So evidence that new rules generate better results, and that, you can find some people, we were just talking about Maha, for example, she generates better results. And so she keeps doing that new thing repeatedly. So there's always an innovator's curve and an adoption curve, like Everett Rogers early on influenced me, wrote The Diffusion of Innovation. And so, Dave, I'm optimistic about, we know what it is, we know how to do it, and it's diffusing more broadly through lots of different settings. And a lot of, this is a kind of a twist, but I think a lot of the systems we relied on that were generated through that traditional pattern of interaction have proven to be more fragile, less reliable. And so in this period where some of that's falling apart, it's even easier to snap back and harder to find that thing that's productive, that's new. And so new ways to evaluate. I work a lot on evaluation, like how do people know that their pattern is more generative, that novel results are unfolding as a result of a different pattern of interacting. And most of the measurement that we do is we decide what an outcome is in advance and then say, did we get there? Well, I'm way more interested in, did anything surprising, completely novel, that generates value, that wasn't there before? And so that's pretty hard to notice versus a predetermined outcome and a step-by-step path to, did we get there? I don't know. I was rambling. I'm sure I just rambled a bit. But
I want to dig into something here that's got a good tension to it. because this is one of the fabulous things about this particular project. We have facilitators, we have technologists, we have research scientists coming together to look at it. And I heard you use a bunch of words that don't always sit comfortably in the same sentences. I heard evidence, right? I heard interest in helping provide basically data or research or backing so that the cynics might become just merely skeptics or perhaps even converts to try new ways of working. Then I also heard improvisation. I heard emergent. I heard generative, right? So one of the tensions in this project is trying to come up with a structured experiment that creates rigorous enough data within a predefined time period. How are you making sense of that for yourself? And what are you liking about this, and where are some of the tensions for you?
Well, I think the kind of innovations we want are something that unfolds over a longer period of time, in which people explore adjacent territory, and they flip back and forth. But in the context of a particular meeting, some measures that I regularly put into play that generate evidence, they're evidence generated by the individuals in the meeting. And they are, well, did your relationship with others, because there weren't just presentations, but you were talking to multiple people, did your relationship deepen? Did you learn more about each other? Second thing, really important, is the context in which we're trying to understand and make some move forward. Did we get more information? Do we understand more about the context for how we might act? And third measure, and everybody can assess this for themselves, it's a measurement, it's evidence. Did something make you go, huh, or that's different, or that's novel? Did something arise out of that interaction with others and out of that deeper understanding of context that was new? So those are hints. Those are three elements that, for me, when there's lots of deepening of each other, understanding the diversity, deepening sense of context, and like you can then ask, well, did any of that, did something new start to take shape? And so that's the kind of evidence. So that's called a developmental evaluation. It's something that evaluators are doing more of, but I think it puts the participants in charge of evaluating their experience in shaping what happens next. Right. So is that what you had in mind, Elise?
Sure. Right. And so with this particular experiment, we have the opportunity to get the glimpse, right? To get that first piece where we say, okay, to get to that sparky set of results where they're more connected, they're more intrigued by the ideas that are coming out. This is how we might do it. And from there, then the next stages of innovation are more likely or more able to flow, potentially. Is that a fair restating?
Yes, and it's a glimpse, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a glimpse, because most innovation stuff, it goes through lots of iteration. So for me also is what are the number of cycles? What are the iterative cycling that happens even in a single meeting? I've found that you can do lots of iterations very quickly. It may not be comfortable. It's not the habit that we've learned, but I'm really comfortable in doing 10-minute cycles from you think about it, two people talk about it, a group of four reports some things out, and then, well, how did that go? Did we come up with anything good? Do we need to dig another? Do we need to do another round? Would that be productive? And the answer is usually, oh yeah, because that only took 10 minutes or 12 minutes would be a typical cycle. And so that quick iterative thing with evaluation attached to it is one of the new habits. Could be new rules. I don't know if it should be a rule, but I'd like it to be a habit, Dave. Yeah.
Well, habits are good. And I was wondering, in order to avoid the snapback and to create the new, whether we're calling them rules or habits, and it's, we can have a really good meeting, we could have a really good workshop, at some point, and I wonder, I'm specifically curious about time horizons and assumptions. As part of the larger culture of the company, is it easier to snap back because sometimes those two things are misaligned? The way somebody who's doing something in the new way, oh, we need to run an experiment, we need to do a test, but the culture just might say, look, it's more important that we say we had the meeting and we made the presentation, or that we just made a decision, we have to move out on this. And at some point, that's where the snapback happens, is because, I try to have meetings a different way. I try to bring a different point of view, but I'm hitting what people refer to as the culture wall, or maybe I don't know if that's a real term. Is the expectation of time horizon, or just more culture, whether it's time related or not, is that at all at play in the snapback?
Well, when I complain about my clients, which I do, not to their face usually, but I'll say something. And in the last few years, what I've complained about is the time horizon has come. I used to be able to do 50, 20, depending on the organization, like NASA, they'd go 100 out, or 50. We're developing things for 50 years from now. It's like, okay, cool. I'm in. Love that. But it's been creeping back, closer, closer, closer. And so the time horizon is something. There's certain kind of optimism about the future or possibilities that need to be entertained. And the other thing that's happened simultaneously is saying how some of the systems have become more fragile or more obvious that they're not working very well. And some of that is, I just don't have any power. So why would I propose something for the future? We're just trying to fix what's broken here. And so it brings the time horizon real close, and like, what's your KPI or whatever short-term fixing thing? It's like patch up the machine, and that is tricky. So for example, what we'll do, one of the liberating structures is called 15% solutions. And this is, what do you have the discretion and autonomy to do now? No permission required, just something you can do now to address this complex challenge. And it's like, it's hard for people to come up with anything. It's the most invisible part. Like, what do you really, okay, we're trying to work on the future of work. Well, what could you do? Could you have a conversation with your manager about job sharing or something that you actually feel confident, even though there's pressure to get the work done, and a lot of people are out for various reasons, or they're not working very hard for good reasons. What can you do now? And so things like that are more important now, because that time horizon has come in, and a lot of the stuff is busted. A lot of stuff is busted. So that sort of, I bet you've experienced this too. The vast set of possibilities that were there seem less possible, partly because of the bureaucracy, and partly because those organizations that we created, which work like a clock a fair amount of the time, don't work as well when the environment around them is a swirling, chaotic mess.
Yeah, there seems to be no shortage of ideas, solutions, but then it's fitting them into whatever larger system that you're working within, right? So,
well, one other thing there, Dave, just quickly. So another one that we do a lot, which is counterintuitive about innovation, it's a liberating structure. It's called TRIZ. TRIZ is also a Russian engineering approach, but it's like define the perfect adverse system, like the most boring meeting you could imagine. Second part is, well, in what ways do we resemble those things that we just designed? A bunch of them. We did 99% presentations, and then little question at the end. And then, well, what part of that part 3 of that activity is, what can you stop? What are the things that you could, counterproductive behaviors you can stop doing? And that turns out, counterintuitively, that opens this huge space for innovation, because we've crowded our lives with all these things that are not productive, that are wastes of time. And meeting culture is a huge contribution to that. So what can we stop doing? Not start. There's no shortage. Just you keyed me. You poked me right in the place. Like, oh, there's no shortage of ideas. There is a shortage of space for ideas to take hold. A huge problem. And so I work with that all the time. It's probably the most popular place to start because it's a good laugh. I mean, we've created an environment and we keep snapping back to it that has no space for innovation in it.
So I have to just share a quick story on that one. So Triz premortem, that those kinds of negative framings to help you find that. I love learning these things. And I love that we're having this opportunity not only to experiment, to share, but to also share some of these things in this symposium because they come up all the time. I was having a conversation last night with my son who is in the Coast Guard, and he just got assigned to open a bar at an air base in Alaska as his Coast Guard duty, which is like the coolest military duty ever. But he's got this problem where there just aren't very many people who are coming in. And so he wants to, because they've reopened this bar, sort of make it an interesting, exciting place for the community. And so we used on the phone basically the Triz approach. I was like, okay, if you were a total supervillain trying to make it the most depressing base to be on in the entire service, what would you do? And we talked through how you'd like glare at people and only serve one thing and, all of this stuff. And I said, okay, well, what can you stop doing that you're doing now, and what might you do that would shift that? And by the end, of a 15-minute call, he's like, I'm going to make sure I learn people's names and I say hi to them when they come in, and I'm going to sit down with them and learn how to make their favorite drinks. And he had this list of stuff to try, and he's like, and I'm going to polish up the shuffleboard table and we're going to talk about how to do it.
Well, and those were all responses. Well, those are some things he's starting.
And there were things he was stopping, which was like not glaring at them
because he
can't
do any of those things until he stops the others. So the only discipline with this habit is like stop the thing. The ideas will come. They're going to just whoosh. Ideas will. It's a vacuum. As soon as there's space for it, the ideas will come. So if you should build for the next interaction with him. I know he's.
I'd build a Coast Guard. Hey.
Hey, what did you stop?
Exactly.
Have you stopped the things that you mentioned? Because that's the harder part. Like our habits are hard to stop.
Yeah, you have to start by stopping, which is counterintuitive.
Super nutty. Yeah. And it's good stuff, but it's hard. And it's helpful to have a mom or a coach to help with. But did you
or a consultant
actually do that?
Right. So I want to turn the corner here to maybe something a little more upbeat than all the reasons that we're not getting the change done.
Good idea.
So we're doing this symposium and competition and experiment and festival. You said yes. You mentioned why you said yes. What is exciting you about, I guess, generally this moment, more specifically the new rules for work and what we're about to embark on?
You're going to laugh, I think. I want the results. I want some solid arguments that I can point to that say across these platforms or just in the platforms, here's some choices that you can make that are going to help you be productive. And so particularly I've felt it very challenging because I practice the hybrid. That stuff is like a goat rodeo. I just never, it's amusing because the two paces, like the people in the room and the virtual is faster and sharper and everything's written down and it's great. And the people in the room just seem to be goofing around and they take a lot longer to do everything. And I don't know if that's everyone's experience, and it doesn't mean it's bad. There's all kinds of good things with face-to-face, but once you've been online for a while. So I want results that are practical for me. But also, like we said, the future is here. We know how to do these things. Can we just get them distributed more completely and more broadly and into the pattern of habits? So, and I think you're designed for a learning session and then an experiment that generates, and the folks that you've included as evaluators and practitioners and theorists is just fabulous. What you've done is absolutely great. So I think it will we'll do our best to generate good advice for people who are trying to figure this out, because we know how to do things, but we haven't generated much solid evidence for the larger group. If you're doing it, you're kind of like, oh yeah. But that oh yeah doesn't work for the whole world.
Well, you're right, because we know, I think for those of us who have been doing it, and you've been at the end of a good meeting or a good workshop, and you kind of look around and wow, and there might not be a linear path you can point to say exactly how we got here, but you just know you got to the right spot. And I think we're starting to see some of that research and some of the science back up what we feel, if I may, what we feel to be true when we're at the end there and we know we got to the right spot. I want to ask you if you could, and I have a hunch you might not take the bait on this one, but I want you to imagine we're having this conversation maybe next November. The project's done and it was amazing. And maybe we're in person. Maybe we're having an espresso, a cappuccino, a tea,
macchiato.
Maybe the three of us.
Yeah,
maybe I'm up in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, no, this is where some of it started.
Yeah. What's specifically, what's different? Paint a picture. You got the results. What's going on?
Yeah. No, I'm going to bite on that, Dave. I'm going to bite on that. That's a tasty morsel. It's a chocolate biscotti next to my double macchiato. Yeah. Well, I judge this by the number of unusual suspects, people working in domains that all of a sudden their eyes start to sparkle and they're going to transform the situation around them. And they're willing to walk out on some limbs to do that work. And there's more of those folks. There's some folks like that that'll walk out on limbs. They don't even know there's a tree there, but they'll walk out on a limb. But I'm talking, when I say unusual suspect, what I mean there is people who never expected, and you're just kind of like, oh, that's what you're going to do? That's the work you're going to do? And I remember, well, that's already happened in the work I do once in a while, but doing something that's so valuable that people just, okay, I'm in the work now. There's momentum generated that spirals out to people that would never have seen themselves joining a movement to change how we work, to change what a workplace is, to create a new kind of organization that you actually adore from top to bottom. I think you can adore an organization and sort of not like how it works. I remember when I was first learning about complexity science, it was with a lot of professors and physicists and mathematicians, and they were all really interesting and great. And then just a few of us wanted to work on organizational things. And we'd say, well, what about the school you're in, the university? And we'd just laugh. That's not going to change. I love it. It's where I do my research, all these things. It's great. I'm not leaving the university, but it's a hot mess and it won't change. So that would be an unusual suspect. Professors in prestigious universities are willing to go out on a limb to change how they work.
That would be so amazing. We have this cross-contamination of the practitioners and the academics, like infecting each other with their awesomeness. I have had this song from Oklahoma going through my head for like days. The farmers and the cowhands need to be friends. Like, it would be so cool.
Yeah, well, thanks. That was a good question, Dave. I don't know why you didn't think I'd go for it, but that's good. Yeah, no, I like to think about. I'll take you up on the macchiato when the time comes. Yeah.
I wonder how we could know, where all the sparklers have gone off, right? All of the unusual. How do you find the unusual suspects 1 year, 2 years from now? I'll be looking forward to seeing people's ideas. Hashtag I'm a sparkler. I don't know.
They won't see themselves that. I don't know. When I did more face-to-face work, I had a certain look, I was looking for. And some people would come up and say something like, that's the first time I felt respect. They'd say something profound about their experience to start. And then later on, I found out they developed a whole set of things, and they may not have used any of the names or referred to specifically the work, but they started to change their habits, and that's what I want.
Well, that's it. They don't know those sparklers. They're just doing it.
They're just doing their work differently.
And it's good to go back to the university. Nobody teaches you how to work at a university, right? Nobody teaches you. So wouldn't it be great if these kinds of things were just taught there and you just expect it when you go to work? This is just how we work.
Well, and I've been in some business schools and consulted in some business schools, and it's not what they're. Generally, it's a fringy thing still to approach the work with new rules. It's more like, let's use the old rules and we'll kind of have some countermeasures to soften the blows associated with the old rules. And so these are things that facilitators learn how to do. How do you get buy-in without people knowing it? Let's try some here. I'm going to be catty for a second. Let's do change management, or, the list goes on, but there are things, countermeasures that we've taught facilitators and created a professional class of people, not to fundamentally change the rules, but soften the blow of the top down. We make the decision and then others should adopt it. And that's just one of the mythical things. Only experts could possibly shape these policies that we need. And so we're just really going to listen to experts. And until you change those rules and all voices are included in shaping what happens next, you're going to do a lot of fixing if you're still playing by the old rules. So there's much less fixing. So I was trained as a facilitator, or got some facilitation training actually from Dave Sibbett in the Bay Area, and lots of wonderful people. I got that, but I don't really use any of it. Once there's new rules, most of that is irrelevant. Most of it is irrelevant.
Agreed. Keith, I have two more questions.
Yeah.
One, what's the most important job skill for the next 5 years?
Okay, I'll give you two answers. One is face up to your despair. Can you work with despair? Can you work with what's been lost? Can you grieve what you've lost? It's sort of like a trizz for yourself. Can you let go of? It's not really like a trizz because you actually have to do some work, but can you grieve a little bit? And it might help you do some things. So after that, the next 5 years would be, well, I've been doing a lot with critical uncertainty. So what futures are plausible? And then what are the range of responses that would prepare us for surprise? Given that we don't know what the future is, what are the range of, so imaginative thinking and disciplined thinking about a range of responses given that the future will surprise us. So that's a skill. That's a big one.
Agreed. Last question. If people want to learn more about you, what you do, liberating structures, where should they go?
Well, there's a huge community. So there's user groups all over. There's people all over. That's really the best way. And usually people learn from folks in their particular domain. So Maha, for example, in schools, there's a bunch of people I could point to or that you would find. In this space, Elise is a knowledgeable practitioner. There's lots of people out there. We have a good app that some users created. We have a Slack community that's challenged at the moment. We have all the things, a website, all the things to help people. But generally, we've found that a local group that you can invent and practice with is good. So I've tried to support the user groups. Some are coming, I had a rough patch through the pandemic. Some made the conversion to online and some really didn't, but they're starting to rise again. So yeah, finding people you can practice with is the big thing there, Dave. You gain confidence because it is unfamiliar. The unwitting ways are comfortable and they stick because we know how to give a presentation.
You don't have to face your despair.
Yeah, some of that's lost. It's not coming back. I wish organizations were perfectly simple to organize, but they require a little more, a little bit more.
They do. They do.
Cool.
Well, Keith, thank you for this.
Yeah.
And we'll post all the
Thank
links
you.
you just mentioned along with this where people can find you.
My pleasure. Really, I like your interview skill. Yeah. And thanks for including me in the project. Yeah, I'm in. I'm on it.
Sweet.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. To learn about the new rules for work, purchase tickets, or submit your team for an experiment, check out newrulesforwork.com. If you're interested in partnering, reach out to us at info@newrulesforwork.com.